Twitless, what are we talking about today?
Today we are talking about Adult Swim's adaptation of Uzumaki, episode 2, and we're also talking about the chapters in the manga that are covered. Quite a lot of material, actually, a chunk of the manga being covered, all intersecting. So we've got the city that Kyrie and Shuichi live in, and it is cursed by the spiral. Um, and the city, the best way to explain what's going on here, the manga, like I said, is just or the anime is pulling straight from the manga and is just kind of very briefly and in a very expurgated way, just covering these chapters at almost a mile a minute. The brief synopsis is that the city continues to devolve into madness, essentially, and devolve into supernatural madness surrounding the spiral curse and their obsessions with it. Just to give a couple samplings, we've got a Romeo and Juliet couple that twist themselves into a knotted snake DNA helix looking thing. We've got students turning into snails. We've got a boy who gets run over by a car. We've got Kyrie, whose hair turns into lollipop looking medusoid spirals that mesmerize while also threatening to kill her and are draining her life force, essentially. And we also have a haunted lighthouse that's of hellish proportions. All of that in just one 20 some odd minute episode.
So my hot take for this episode was that it is such a blatant, uh, gross cash grab that it's
Yeah.
poorly delivered upon the source
Yeah.
material. It actually makes the source material seem worse. As good as it is, and like it's unfair to judge it in the context of what the anime actually delivered. It is delivering it in such a diminished, cheap format that I
Mhm.
look at the original material and it doesn't have the same impact for me. I don't feel excited at the idea of seeing this on the big screen anymore, animated into frames. I could see where originally you would read the manga and the stories were very original, they were very interesting, they're episodic, they're self-contained, and they tell very nice little narratives in each one. There's a very good emotional setup. There's a conflict there. There's a lot of drama, and it all has a very satisfying payoff with the horror elements. But looking at how that material was reimagined and reformatted
Mhm.
when it was actually put on the screen makes it feel like there just isn't as much value in that material as there was originally. It's now kind of damaged goods, for lack of a better
Oh,
term.
no.
Yeah,
Spoiled.
somebody had their way with this, very high level manga and just, threw it into the gutter.
All right,
So
I need to defend it in a couple ways. So the intention of the creative team, I think, was not to do that. I ended up rewatching the first episode right next to the second one just to compare, and there's definitely a degradation in the animation quality between the first episode and the second. So the first episode definitely shines a lot stronger than the second one does. Even just in terms of like I know I say it's black and white, but just even the coloring that they use, it becomes a lot more gray than the first episode. The first episode had a much stronger black and white contrast. Um, but there's some drama behind the scenes. Like I said, just you can peruse the Wikipedia article, you can see some of the buzz on this online. Um, the creator ran into some, I think, the director ran into some huge budgetary problems. They, I think, kind of blew their wad all the way on basically that first episode, and then they were basically given a choice of, um, just pack it up and go home, cancel the project entirely, or essentially make, I think, 3 episodes on the budget or something that they had used for like that first one. And so some of what we're seeing is just um, and the creative team behind this want, like I said, you can see that in the evidence in that first episode. They're trying their darndest, and it's just the money is not there. And I and so and I this was also made, I think, during it was made partially during the COVID pandemic. I think they said COVID didn't impact them, but I think it might have. It was delayed multiple times. They like I said, they were faced with certain crossroads, and like I said, to either make it or abandon it. So that doesn't excuse the product, but I think at least gives some context. I don't think this was a cynical project by any means. I think it is a tragic project, but I'm actually going to put a spin on this and say this: in a work that is about the degeneration and devolution of a particular city, where everything is literally falling apart and like circling the drain. Right, it's literally what Uzumaki is. It ends up being a story about a society that circles the drain. There is, from a textual perspective, there is something oddly fitting about a series that, as it seems to go on, starts to spiral the drain. So, like, there was a weird moment where I was like, "Oh, this series is starting to kind of spiral into nothingness," and I was
Yeah.
like, "That kind of fits the theme." Like it's
Oh, come
become
on.
The spiral hit the production
the spiral hit
studio.
but like but that makes the Uzumaki a it's a cursed production. I don't know. There's something about that I find to be fascinating. I will say that after saying all of that, walking into episode 2 knowing that it was going to spiral into terrible, it held up better than I thought it would. I think that's because my
Yeah.
expectations were so low, but I was like, I was still kind of digging some of what was going on. The manga is clearly superior in most ways, pretty much all.
Let's take a brief pause to hear from the awesome creators joining us today and find out what cool projects they're currently working on.
Hey guys, if you love sword and sandal historical fiction with a healthy dose of ancient Roman and Egyptian fantasy mixed in, then check out Kyrie. We've got 450 pages printed so far, a fourth book on the way. Order your books today at curiecomic.com.
Modern day, classic superhero storytelling. Get The Adventures of Omega Girl, issues 1 through 5, now on Indie Planet.
Thank you to our awesome creators, and now back to the video.
I think the first episode was a little fussy, almost, because it was trying to be as like detailed, I guess, as the manga. Like it just kind of leaned towards like how do we recreate this like hatching detail and all this kind of extra stuff that I think doesn't look fussy on a page. It can start to look fussy really fast in animation. And I actually kind of partly because I was prepped again to think of episode 2 is gonna be bad,
Yeah.
but also because a lot of that fussiness gets stripped away. This episode felt a little cozier. I don't know, like it did feel like just taking the stories, like tabling the story, which I think was horrible. Like just didn't give me any of the vibes of the first one. This episode 2, like just visually was I think it was serviceable just because it was more efficient. And I think it's important to be efficient with animation. Like you don't want your eyes like kind of getting needled by all your little pin work and stuff because you're trying to recreate something that sits on a static page, but now you have to animate it. That gets a little staticky, I think, for the eye, and they couldn't afford to do any of that this time, so it was like simpler. But the story, like like dueling hairdos, by two diva girls, like I don't see how you can do that and still maintain like serious composure, like as a, do you know what I mean? Like you're gonna lose that cosmic horror vibe, I think, pretty
Actually,
fast.
I actually like that one a lot.
Did you? Oh, come
No,
on.
no, I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why.
Why?
I'll tell
It's
you
like
why.
Mean Girls with spirals? I don't know.
It's the only story out of the manga that specifically applies to Kyrie. And I personally find the fact that it's emanating from her to be fascinating when you try to puzzle out the whole work.
Yeah.
Because most of the
Okay.
other times that these the spiral curses happen,
Yeah.
they always result in that person dying. And Curie is like, I think, the only character who gets spiral cursed, and she's able to continue to live afterwards, and she's the center of it and almost in the cause of it. And when you
Yeah.
like play with that role in the overall narrative, the hair story stands out because of it, and like it leads to me to have some very interesting, some I think some theories about it, because Kyrie, we're led to believe the story that Kyrie is the innocent in all of Uzumaki, and but by the end of the overall manga, I'm left wondering about that, because she and Shuichi end up being the center of it all. And drawing things towards their center is what the Uzumaki is. And
Yeah.
so there's some puzzles around it, and the hair episode gives me some context to that puzzle. So the goofiness of a hair duel notwithstanding, the
Yeah, but losing her hair, maybe, and yeah,
yeah, that's what I'm saying. There's
intimations of that being like losing one's uh her bride head, her innocence or something, or there's some
yeah,
kind of compromise to free herself,
the
you
fact that
know.
Shuichi has to be one who clips her. I don't know. Like
Yeah. Uh-huh.
there's some things. So I know
That's
on the
fair.
surface of it I know on the surface of it there's some silliness, but I think there's something there because it's the only story where she ends up being the center of it. Out of these narratives, really.
Yeah.
So that's
I
just
I just think that there's one it would be it's a loss for the vision of the story if it's just, "Oh, look, here's another thing that has a spiral. Oh, here's another thing," you know? And it starts to feel contrived. But if it like, standing back and saying out of what we got from the manga itself, particularly the opening couple issues, like, I'm willing to see, yeah, what they're gonna do with Kyrie and uh, other themes, and it's probably gonna land well, even if it doesn't explain itself.
well, Red. You've been quiet for a bit.
Yeah, sorry.
Well, I was gonna say, that point that you just said that they're clipping out these moments is actually where I feel like they kind of cheapened and prostituted to a degree the source material. I understand they had budgetary constraints, and the director still had ambition, and I'm not going to say he had a vision. Quite frankly, I think he just wanted to reach the finish line in this case.
Hmm.
He should have respected the source material because what he did is he truncated all of the emotional setup for these moments. And he just inserted all of these climaxes of the spiral shock that was occurring um, in the manga that was set up quite effectively and just peppering it across this episode all over the place where nothing really made a lot of sense. You were just supposed to go from one intense, disturbing moment to the next. And
Yep.
for some reason, that was supposed to be meaningful for you once you actually had it revealed and saw it on screen. So it felt like he very much just cherry picked these elements that he thought, oh, this is sellable. And this is the way that I'm going to drive this home if I just take these pieces here that were the most impactful in the story. But he neglected to appreciate how much effort there was put into the story to actually deliver that impact through the emotions, through the character interactions. I really didn't like the approach taken here to just go from the ends of each of these stories and to take so many of them and just stitch them together and call it a day. Really
It's pretty
diminished the
brutal.
original work.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree. I think I was able to enjoy this somehow. And this is someone who like really appreciates Junji Ito's work, not just Uzumaki. And I've read Uzumaki multiple times. I was looking forward to this anime. I actually assigned this to some students, and we were all looking forward to the anime like back when it was pre-delayed. And so the way I was able to enjoy it is I kind of just like maybe I got sucked into the spiral itself. But I got mesmerized by just the rhythm that its own rhythm that it made. And then I
Mm,
think that's around the point where I was like, oh, this is degenerating like an Uzumaki. And I was like, I'm just going to enjoy the spiral down.
mhm,
And then once I did that, I was able to kind of get cozy with it, as Matt said. And
mm,
then I was able to go, this isn't as bad as I thought. So I got enjoyment out of it. But if you were trying to like, but I completely agree. If you're trying to think about it as doing justice to Junji Ito's work, I really I can see why it's so disappointing. I remember the when the kid jumps in front of the car, just how that's played off. I felt nothing when it happened because of the way it's set up. It's just not
oh,
well
yeah,
handled. Yeah, it's just
Or
awful.
even having just its own self-contained narrative, like it just took these moments because he'd read the work and he thought this is going to be the most sellable elements of it. But what about
Mhm,
this episode having its own story, which I didn't feel that it did at all? And
yep,
mhm.
there was a lot of payoff that was neglected, like that kid jumping in front of the car. There was this entire sequence in the manga where they go to the grave of the kid and they're going to kill him, and the kid resurrects, and the
I still
spiral.
I think we're gonna get that. I think that's the next episode because like what he's doing is he's like planting seeds because like the snail was put in episode one briefly and then
mhm,
pays off in this one, and so I think that the kid who got crunched in the car, I think episode three we'll see that grave scene. It'll probably be about 2 minutes because of how how
oh, yeah,
truncated everything is. It'll be done in 3 minutes and the pacing of it will just be off, but I think it'll still show up. Um,
What's the most interesting about that grave scene actually from the manga is that it's the least spiral oriented um uh sequence, or event that occurs for any of these characters within this entire story so far. There's nothing
mhm,
spiral oriented with him becoming a living zombie and having a coil from the car be stuck in his torso that allows him to bounce around. So I I don't think that there was any spiral magic actually at play there. He just seemed to be drawing elements from other horror genres or horror stories to be able to make that moment.
That's a weird one in the manga. It's a standout because of that. He works the spiral in because of that coil, right? But it's definitely the standout. The the real magic of Uzumaki, something that we were talking about before the show, is that Ito is able to do cosmic horror, which is some Lovecraftian cosmic horror, so a thing that gets thrown around a lot in fiction. Something that Matt and I were talking about at length, and we have talked about at length before. A lot of people misunderstand Lovecraftian horror as just tentacle monsters, when in fact, real cosmic horror has a tentacle motif. But what's really the horror is things, stories like The Color Out of Space, which is really reminds me of Uzumaki, which is this unknowable force that we can't quite see. We don't really quite know what it is. There's just something very something outside of our knowledge that's malicious in some form or fashion. And it's not necessarily like intentionally malicious, but it's just malicious because it's just so beyond us. And that makes it kind of sinister and very frightening. Because the things that are the scariest of all are things that are in our own imagination, in our own subconscious, things we can't properly visualize, verbalize, or articulate. And so
mhm,
Uzumaki has the spiral, but it's not like a god has sent the spiral to the town. It's not like there's a scientific explanation for this. There are like creatures and monsters in this story, but there's no master monster here. There's just this concept, this abstract concept that's kind of just uneasy. It's not meant to be comfortable, and it just permeates everything and drives everyone crazy. And it leaves the reader searching for answers, including the creator. When Ito is kind of like asked kind of about this, he kind of shrugs his shoulders a bit about it, and it's just kind of like, well, it's just a creepy thing that is defies understanding. And so that's the real magic of Uzumaki. I think that the manga sells that idea pretty well. Um, I don't know how well the show sells that whole idea of it by being unknowable and kind of a mess. So
It's cold and unforgiving, and it feels like a force of nature that you can't rationalize. but it does seem to have elements that tie into some of the characters' plight. For example, the two lovers who are forbidden from being with one another ultimately are conjoined. It did produce that result for them, and they were able to spend the rest of their eternity together. And then in the first episode, you had uh, the man who was he was a carpenter. He would do crafting at home, and he would become obsessed with spirals, and eventually would form himself into one of the spirals. This is the character who reemerges here in the smokestack as one who's now become merged with the spirals and is quite content with the form of eternity that he's ultimately discovered. Uh,
That's Shuichi's father. He's yeah.
yeah, so there are elements where it seems to also be fulfilling some destinies and some desires and some hope and intent in the characters as well as being this unknowable uh, force of nature that is not part of our understanding and part of our control, but seems to have still very impactful effects upon the lives of the characters in this storyline.
One little thing just to help us tie it up that is actually interesting that is consistent between I wanna say between manga and anime, between episode 1 and episode 2, is this, like, David Lynchian, of all things, rest in peace,
Yeah.
uh, kind of, this this strange, like, austerity, where the characters are not, they never they're just kind of like dreamscape floating from seed to seed, acting, uh, like, suspended from being able to actually emotionally deal other than screaming or staring, like, actually deal with these scenarios, and there's kind of a horror in that itself that none of these characters are relatable, and yet you are told it is demanded that you relate to them, so you have to see things from their perspective, and they're entirely, like, alien to their world and to themselves as they navigate these scenarios, and that discordance, I think that's key to this as a like, this kinda story and as a genre, and it's still worked well, I think, like, Kyrie going up through the lighthouse, it's still tripping me up that I guess it is her name pronounced Kyrie, actually?
No,
Or, like,
no,
Kyrie?
no, it kind of is. Yeah, that's what I think is
Yeah,
amazing. It's like
that's
now
hilarious.
is our perfect time to plug Kyrie.
Yeah,
But like
insert plug
that's her
here.
that's her name.
But, like,
I
Um,
do I
her
do like the
going up the
lighthouse story.
lighthouse and back,
oh, I
like,
love that one.
there was nothing about the lighthouse that would make you think that this is being realistically driven by this character, like, that she would be, other than just, like, these momentary but that's actually really important towards telling these kind of stories well, is that you're having these kind of liminal experiences through these characters where that they're not acting normally as they investigate these scenarios, and that's part of the point. Like, you know, so that's kind of interesting to put yourself in a character's perspective who is upsetting you because they are not acting like they should be as they engage that, and that naturally weaves itself into the universe that's being portrayed in this kind of cosmically horror way. So I appreciated that was maintained throughout this.
This powerlessness in the face of this indomitable force. It almost must be what prey feels like in the wild, right? As a predator descends upon it, and it's just paralyzed in shock, fear, and lack of understanding, and it just surrenders to it. And yeah, you do. They're out of character very much, and you do feel that very much conveyed. They're being preyed upon and destroyed. I do think the lighthouse was my favorite story, though.
Lighthouse
With
is
it
top tier. It's good.
within this episode, yeah.
The manga it's a top tier one too. I think. So either or, I think the Lighthouse one, just because it's I don't know, it's just so ominous. You know what I mean? It's this, and just the way Ito delivers. I actually, this is a minor point, but did you notice in the manga and as opposed to the anime, when he draws the lighthouse lens, the spiral on that lens, there's like a little dot on the lens that almost looks like an eye.
Mm.
There's just this one little dot, and it almost looks like it's like the eye is actually looking at you. Yeah, there's this one little dot he puts on it. That's that one little detail that actually makes it just not a spiral, but like an eye that's kind of like looking at them. And I was literally looking at the anime going, is the dot there? And it wasn't. So it's so interesting how that little detail makes a big difference.
So, final thoughts. What do you guys think, Twitless?
I'm a big enjoyer of Junji Ito's work, and I like Uzumaki. It's not, I think, my favorite work of his, but it's there's a reason why it's very memorable and it's very good. The anime is I think the first episode is a testament to having actually an artistic vision and doing something very interesting with the animation and the approach. I think it's so memorable with what it's doing and how it's doing it. But I in terms of the storytelling for both episodes 1 and 2, it's kind of a mess. It's kind of a spiraling down the drain mess. That doesn't mean it's not a doesn't mean you can't derive any enjoyment from it. I am actually deriving enjoyment from watching this mess unfold. But it is a sad to see an opportunity that could have been so much better be squandered, right? I think with 8 episodes and maybe choosing specific stories and committing to them, like in a serialized format, doing, hey, we'll do the lighthouse chapter as an episode. Maybe we do 8 episodes in total. We choose the episodes we're going to do, and then like end on the final one. It would leave stuff out, but the stuff that they would have done, they could have delivered much more effectively on in pacing and in structured storytelling. I think that would actually make this a far better series. They only had 4. I don't even know what you do at that point. So it's. I think this thing was kind of murdered in development.
Mhm.
So there's still some enjoyment to get out of it. The approach to the story is very, very interesting. Over by Ito's work, Uzumaki is a very interesting story. So I definitely encourage people to check this out. It's definitely, if you're a body horror enjoyer, Ito is a master of that craft. But yeah, the show is a bit of a wreck.
Hmm. Well read. How about you? Final thoughts.
I think if the director respected the source material and actually understood it, he would have just chosen a few chapters to emphasize and give them their proper interpretation on the screen. I probably would have cut the story about the snail boy, about the 2 lovers, and about the Jack in the Box boy, and just focused on the girl with the hair and the lighthouse. Those were sufficient to carry a narrative forward, I think, for the remainder of the series, particularly if he had only a few episodes. I'm not looking forward to watching the rest of the series, quite honestly, because I don't like the way it's coloring my interpretation of the source material. But we'll soldier on, everybody, and we'll get through this together. So we'll stick by one another, and we'll survive Uzumaki episodes 3 and 4 yet to come.
Thank you very much for checking out the video. Subscribe, like, and stay tuned for more.